I'd been preparing the first lecture in my graduate seminar on ethical theory, rereading a number of the excellent works written in the 20th century by American and European philosophers. For several decades, I had found myself pulled one way or another by such thinkers as Alan Goworth and Richard Brandt, whose texts, Reason and Morality and A Theory of the Good and the Right, had constituted the core works I had my graduate students read and discuss before we turned to other readings. This particular day, the week before classes began, I had been in the campus bookstore checking to see if all my textbooks were available in sufficient supply for the 30 students that had registered for my contemporary ethical theory course. I had copies of the Goworth and Brandt texts tucked under my arm and decided to drop by the campus Starbucks for a cup of cafe mocha to take the chill away from my core before completing the half-mile trek back to my office. Remember, this is Buffalo in January. I entered, got my drink, looked around for a place to sit. Across the room in a corner was my new friend Rose, with her nose in a course catalog. I decided to go over and sit down and talk with her. "Rose, may I join you?" She started and looked up. "Why, Dr. Phil, now my devil's disciple is pursuing me," she said with a twinkle in her eye. Then more invitingly, "Sure, please sit with me. I'm sure I can think of a few questions to pass the time." Rose was amazingly inquisitive for a woman who had first seemed to me to be rigid and dogmatic. My conversations with her since we first encountered one another at an anti-abortion demonstration had been profound and increasingly challenging, and I was looking forward to spending an intense half hour or so in discussing whatever was on her mind. As I sat down, Rose eyed the two books I was carrying. "Dr. Phil, what are those about?" As I handed them to her, I said, "These are two of the books I always have in my contemporary ethical theory seminar to read." Rose immediately opened each book in turn, first to the table of contents, then to the works cited section, and finally to the index, which she scanned quickly. "Well," she said summarily, "they can't be very good." I looked at her astonished. "And how did you reach that profound evaluation so quickly?" I asked. "Easily," she said. "No references to the Bible in the table of contents, the works cited, or the indexes." "But Rose, lots of books don't have references to the Bible. Why should that disqualify this one in your eyes?" I knew where she was going, and I began mentally gearing for an argument. "The Bible is the basis for all morality, for everything that is good and right. God's commandments create morality and value. We are moral and good if we follow them, and immoral and bad if we don't." Rose finished. "Well, Rose, that is a widely held view, and it has been around for more than 2,000 years. In fact, the Greek philosopher Socrates, whom I greatly admire, has discussed that view and asked some very interesting questions about it." I didn't know whether Rose had read any Greek philosophy in her education, but thought she may have heard of Socrates. "I have heard of Socrates, but I didn't think he was a Jew or a Christian," Rose said. "I thought he was a pagan, believing in all those ridiculous gods imagined by the Greeks in their lore to explain various occurrences in the world." I said, "Well, you're correct. He's not Jewish or Christian. He couldn't have been Christian because he was born about 470 BCE. You mean 470 BC, before Christ?" Rose interrupted. "Scholars have abandoned that way of referring to dates, as there's a lot of doubt about just when Jesus was born, or even that he actually ever existed. We now refer to dates as either in the Common Era or before the Common Era." "Now you are being silly. It is the same thing whether the date is 470 before Christ or 470 before the Common Era." Rose looked a bit smug. We could spend a lot of time discussing whether the change in the way we refer to dates makes sense or not. My point was that Socrates addressed himself to the view that you identified as the basis of morality and value. Philosophers now call it the divine command theory, I said. "Well, I don't see how he could have. He wasn't a Hebrew," asked Rose belligerently. "No, not Hebrew at all. So how could he have addressed this divine command theory if he didn't know about God and God's commands?" "Well, listen to what he has said and then make up your own mind about whether his remarks are relevant to the divine command theory as you hold it." Rose could sometimes be a little bit exasperating before her critical faculties kicked in. Okay, she said, what did Socrates say? Socrates is reported in Plato's dialogue, The Euthyphro, to have said something like this: are pious actions loved by the gods because they are pious, or are they pious because they are loved by the gods? I paused to see what Rose would say. She was scribbling furiously on a napkin. I think you want me to apply this to the divine command theory, Rose said as I watched her amazingly analytic mind shift into gear. So I am supposed to substitute morally right for pious and commanded by God for loved by the gods, right? She paused to see if I agreed. I nodded. Go on. Rose drew a line through several words on her napkin and then wrote above the lines. So I should consider his question this: are morally right actions commanded by God because they are morally right, or are they morally right because they are commanded by God? I've been amazed at Rose's ability in our other conversations to turn on this keen and penetrating intellect. I had labored for an entire period to get a few students in my introductory classes to grasp the relevance of Socrates' question to their own beliefs. And here Rose had made that abstraction and application with a kind of natural ease in 30 seconds. And what do you think the answer is to Socrates' question as you have extrapolated it? Rose looked at the question she had written, her brow knitted in intense thought. I could see her lips moving, although she wasn't speaking aloud. Suddenly she grew very still. Then she looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Rose, what's wrong? You look stricken, like with grief. Dr. Phil, I just don't know how you do that. You seem to crawl in my brain and give it a little tweak, and suddenly something I was so sure of now seems to me very uncertain. You are truly my devil's disciple. She gave a little laugh as she brushed at her tears with one hand. Well, tell me what you think you've realized, I said gently. I'm stuck. My view is in trouble no matter which way I state it. If I say that morally right actions are morally right because God commands them, then God could be a tyrant who commands whatever he wants, and that will be morally right and obligatory. And if I say that morally right actions are commanded by God because they are morally right, then they must be morally right on some other basis than being commanded by God. On the divine command theory, anything that God commanded would have to be morally right. When he told Abraham to bind his son Isaac and prepare to sacrifice him, it was morally right for Abraham to kill his son. Isaac was saved only when God changed his command and ordered Abraham to stop. Then it was morally wrong for Abraham to kill Isaac. That makes God seem, Rose crossed herself reflexively and finished, impulsively and arbitrary. I toyed in the back of my mind with having Rose show up in front of my class as my substitute today and just simply let them watch her brain work. And what are the other part of Socrates' question, I asked. On the other alternative, God commands morally right actions because they are morally right on some other basis than being commanded by him. That rescues God from having ordered Abraham to sacrifice his son. He didn't really want Abraham to do that. He was just testing his loyalty. Rose's voice ended as though it was a question. Then she went on. But that means that God must know what is morally right and wrong, not just decide it and declare it. And that means that my snotty dismissal of your 2 books was stupid. I'm so sorry, Dr. Phil. You seem to bring out the worst in me sometimes.